A mother orca is pushing her dead calf through the water. Not for an hour, not for a day. For 17 days across 1,000 miles of ocean, she keeps the body afloat, refusing to let it sink, refusing to let it go. Marine biologists who tracked her called it one of the most haunting things they'd ever documented. And the question it forces on you is one science has spent decades avoiding because it sounds too soft, too anthropomorphic, too much like projecting our own feelings onto something we have no right to claim we understand. Was she grieving? The obvious answer for most of the 20th century was simple. No, animals don't grieve, they react. A behavior that looks like mourning is just confusion, or a broken instinct, or a mother failing to register that her offspring is dead. Attributing real grief to an animal was considered, for a long time, bad science. Sentimental, unfalsifiable, embarrassing to even suggest in a serious paper. There's a name for the principle behind this caution. It's called Morgan's Canon, and it's been quietly shaping how scientists talk about animal minds for well over a century. Morgan's Canon, coined by psychologist Conway Lloyd Morgan in 1894, states that you should never attribute a complex mental process to an animal if a simpler explanation will do. On paper, that's reasonable. Science should be careful. It shouldn't leap to the most emotionally satisfying explanation just because it's the one we want to believe. But somewhere along the way, that reasonable caution hardened into something closer to a blanket denial. And for decades, any researcher who suggested an animal might genuinely grieve risked their credibility for saying so. And then, the evidence started piling up so high it became impossible to keep ignoring. Let's start with elephants because they're the case that broke the dam. Elephants have been observed repeatedly and across multiple independent research teams, engaging in behavior around their dead that is difficult to explain any other way. They approach the bodies of deceased herd members slowly, often in silence. They touch the remains with their trunks, specifically around the head and tusks, in a manner researchers describe as investigative and gentle rather than incidental. In some documented cases, elephants have covered the bodies of dead companions, and even dead humans, with branches, leaves, and soil, the same behavior they display toward their own dead. Herds have been observed returning to the site of a family member's death years later, pausing there, lingering, in a way that doesn't map cleanly onto any purely instinctive explanation. Elephant researcher Cynthia Moss, who has studied wild elephants for decades, has described mothers standing over the bodies of dead calves for days, refusing to leave, sometimes trying repeatedly to lift the body with their trunks as if attempting to revive it. That's not confusion. That looks uncomfortably like refusal to accept what's happened. Chimpanzees show something similarly striking, and in some cases, it's been captured on camera in ways that are hard to watch. In 2010, researchers documented a chimpanzee community's reaction to the death of an elderly female. Other chimps gathered around her body, groomed her, and in one particularly striking sequence, a younger chimp appeared to attempt resuscitation, pressing on her chest before eventually giving up. When her body was later removed for burial, several chimps followed it as far as they were permitted to go, watching. In a separate documented case, a chimpanzee mother carried the mummified body of her deceased infant for weeks, continuing to groom it daily long after any biological reason to do so had passed. Primatologists studying this behavior have specifically avoided calling it identical to human grief because they can't know the internal experience. But they've stopped calling it nothing too. Here's where the science actually gets interesting though, because the question isn't really whether animals show grief-like behavior anymore. The evidence for that is overwhelming and well documented across species as different as elephants, primates, dolphins, and corvids. The real question, the one researchers are still fighting over, is whether that behavior reflects something like our internal emotional experience of loss, or whether it's a different kind of response entirely that simply looks similar from the outside. This is a genuinely hard problem, and it's worth being honest about why. Human grief isn't just behavior. It's an internal, narrated, deeply cognitive process. We understand death is permanent. We form beliefs about what it means. We tell ourselves stories about the person we lost. We can't climb inside an elephant's mind and check whether any of that is happening, or whether her behavior is instead a powerful ancient attachment response, firing without the layer of understanding that death is final. Some researchers argue these might functionally be the same thing at a certain point. Others argue there's a meaningful difference between acting distressed because a strong bond has been severed, and grieving because you understand mortality. Both camps are working from the same behavioral evidence and reaching different conclusions about what's happening underneath it, which tells you how genuinely unresolved this question still is. What tips the argument meaningfully towards something real, though, is a pattern researchers call differential response, animals reacting very differently to death depending on their relationship to the deceased. Chimpanzees show far more intense, prolonged distress reactions toward the death of close family members or high-ranking allies than toward strangers or low-bonded group members. If this were purely a mechanical response to a body simply going still, you'd expect a similar reaction regardless of relationship. The fact that the intensity of the response tracks so closely with the strength of the social bond is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that something more sophisticated than blind instinct is running underneath the behavior. Corvids offer one of the strangest and most specific pieces of evidence in this entire field. Crows have been observed gathering around their dead in what researchers now call crow funerals. Groups assembling near a dead crow, sometimes vocalizing loudly, sometimes remaining in tense, watchful silence for extended periods. Researchers at the University of Washington studying this behavior found something unexpected. Crows that witness a dead crow near a specific human or location subsequently treat that human or that location as dangerous for extended periods afterward, sometimes for years, teaching that caution to other crows who never witnessed the original event. This suggests the gathering isn't just emotional, it's functional, a threat assessment ritual layered on top of whatever grief-like distress is also occurring. The line between mourning and information gathering for a crow might not be a line at all. Here's the uncomfortable pivot worth sitting with. For most of the 20th century, denying animals the capacity for grief wasn't just a scientific position, it was convenient. It made it easier to justify how we treated them. Factory farming, habitat destruction, the routine separation of mothers from offspring across dozens of species we raise or displace at scale, all of it is considerably harder to justify once you accept that the being on the other end of it might actually understand and suffer over what's being taken from it. Morgan's Canon protected good science for a while. It's also uncomfortably protected a lot of bad behavior. So do animals grieve like we do? Probably not exactly. The internal experience, the specific texture of it, may never be something we can fully access or prove. But the mother orca who carried her dead calf for 17 days across 1,000 miles of ocean wasn't behaving randomly. Neither was the elephant who stood over her dead calf for days, or the chimp who carried her infant's body for weeks after any reason to do so had passed. Something is happening in those moments that looks uncomfortably and undeniably like loss. We may never know exactly what it feels like from the inside, but we've run out of good reasons to keep insisting it feels like nothing at all.